Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you as usual. Wednesday night Bible class here at the Hoover Church of Christ. And if you by chance be a visitor, we appreciate you being here with us tonight and invite you back anytime you have opportunity on Wednesday night or Sunday. Tonight, before we have our devotional message, we'll sing number 382. 382. Let's sing the first and last verses.
Why did my Savior come to earth and to the humble go? Why did he choose a lowly birth? Because he loved me so. He loved me so. He loved me so. He gave his precious life for me, because he loved me so. Till Jesus comes, I'll sing his praise, and then to glory go, and reign with him through endless days, because he loved me so. He loved me so. He loved me so. He gave his precious life for me, because he loved me so.
After our devotional message, let's sing number 948. 948.
Good evening. In the book of Acts, if you're following along with some of the annual readings of the Bible, you should be somewhere around the latter part of the book of Acts. And as I was reading this earlier, Acts 23 and 24 this week, something jumped out at me, and I remember this from the past, but it always kind of surprises me when I see it again, when I read this portion of the Bible. This is the book of Acts. This is the part where the apostles are preaching about Jesus. You know, they have been given that great commission, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, and share that message with everybody. Start in Jerusalem, go to Judea, Samaria, to the end of the earth, just go all over teaching it. And you see that happening. You read about the ministry of Peter in the first 10, 11 chapters, and then it kind of switches to the Apostle Paul, and he starts teaching, and he and Barnabas go to different places in the world. Well, when we get to Acts 23 and 24, this is where Paul starts getting in trouble. Actually, he started getting in trouble earlier. But this is when he gets arrested. Now, if you weren't looking at this, and I just ask you kind of a trick question, what was it about his preaching that got him arrested? That's a little bit of an unfair question because you can answer that in a whole bunch of ways. I guess my tendency, having not read this closely, might be, well, it had something to do with him preaching the crucifixion of Jesus. You know, you crucified him. Behold, Acts 2, you by wicked hands took him, crucified him, put the Son of God to death, you know. It would be something like that. But if you read on, that actually is not the focal point of their preaching and teaching. There's no denying that Jesus had been crucified. Everybody knew that. But that wasn't the message that got them in trouble. And I'm not going to do this, but I would urge you, sometime when you read the book of Acts, especially read starting in like chapter 20 and going on, when Paul starts getting in trouble and gets arrested. And he gives his defenses. And he's converted in Acts 9. He gives his defenses in Acts 22, and then again in Acts 26, where he stands up and he says, okay, here's what happened, and here's why I'm innocent. Here's why I don't need to be a prisoner. All right, I'm getting to key thing here, and this is it. What got him in trouble and what they could not tolerate was he preached the resurrection of the dead. That was it, over and over again. I challenge you, go back and read it, and you're going to find it again and again and again. It wasn't the crucifixion. Crucifixion was a big deal, of course. But there were lots of people, as we talked about before, there were lots of people who were crucified. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews were crucified in the various uprisings in the days before Jesus and the days after Jesus on into the 2nd century with various rebellions, AD 70, lots of Jews crucified. So that wasn't that big of an anomaly for a Jewish, uprise or upstart, whatever, to be crucified. That wasn't that big of a deal. Big deal was Peter and Paul and James and John said, this Jesus is alive, and we saw him. And as a result of that, we believe that God has conquered death and that all of us are going to be resurrected as well. And that got people upset. The dominant, the money party, the movers and shakers of the Jewish world, the ones who had, they had the money and the influence were the Sadducees. They were like in the positions of prominence. They were the leaders. You had the Pharisees, but the Pharisees didn't have their thumbs on the money. Sadducees were the money people. And the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. They believed that when you died, that was it. And so they couldn't tolerate this, and so they ended up stirring up the crowds against Paul. Now, I say all that to say this. One of the great distinctives of Christianity is what we believe about the resurrection. You can believe Jesus is a good teacher. Lots of people believe that. You can believe that Jesus was a good man. Lots of people believe that. You might even believe that he did some amazing things. There were people who believed that. Some inexplicable things, maybe even some supernatural kind of things. There are a lot of people who believe all those things about Jesus. He was good. He was a good teacher. He did some amazing things, maybe even some supernatural things. He had some sort of prophetic power. But the thing that separates a Christian from somebody who isn't a Christian is you believe all those things about Jesus, and you add to it this. You believe that the tomb was empty on that Sunday morning, and that his body, his physical body, real skin, real flesh, real muscle, real blood, real bones, came out of the tomb. And that was God's pronouncement that this world as it is, with its death and dying, is not the way it's going to be. I'm fixing that. And that's the New Testament calls it, that's the first fruits. First fruit being, that's the first one out of the grave. A lot more coming after that, including everybody in this room. If you're a Christian, you're going to be resurrected. You're going to be one of the next fruits of the resurrection. And the secular world of Jesus' day and the secular world of our day can't take that. They can take us being Christians. Christianity's fine. Helps you be a better person, helps you be peaceful, helps you be a good citizen, all that. That's fine and dandy. But you start believing in resurrection and living consistently with the implications of that, that's when the secular world just cannot tolerate us Christians. It's a big deal. If you're not a Christian tonight, we invite you not to follow a good man, a rabbi, a teacher, even an amazing teacher, not even just to follow somebody who is doing some supernatural things, some life-changing things. We want you to become a follower of God who became a man, who died but was resurrected, and who now lives and has promised that if you are one of his, you too, in the same way, will be bodily resurrected from your grave. That's the hope that you have. If you're ready to confess him tonight and to put him on in baptism and actually go through the symbolic act of dying and being buried and being resurrected in water, that reflects what he did, and it anticipates what's going to happen with your body one of these days. And you can do that tonight. Maybe you need to come back to him as somebody who's not faithful, you've taken your eyes off of him. We want to encourage you. Let's stand and sing this song. If you need to come forward, please do that now.
Things that are higher, things that are
seated. Before Chuck gives us the announcements, I would just like to take advantage of this opportunity to thank everyone for all of your prayers for my wife, Joy. And she's having surgery this coming Tuesday, aggressive breast cancer surgery. And, we were diagnosed in February, went through 5 months of aggressive chemo. She did real well. God blessed her through all of your prayers. And so I'm just telling you, she's doing okay. She's getting ready for surgery Tuesday. And we appreciate all of your prayers. It means everything. I just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Bob. We want to keep praying for Joy. Is that at St. Vincent? Surgery going to be next Tuesday, so keep praying. 2 nights. Okay. And she'll have 6 weeks or so, and then they'll start the radiation, I believe. Is that right? Then they'll be followed by 4 to 5 weeks of radiation. So pray for Joy that all would go well with these. It's been a pretty intensive process, as you can imagine, the last 8 months or so. So, all right. We have others on our prayer list. We want to make sure we remember these folks. You were given care lines and within our announcement sheet. So please pray for these folks. I know that you do, and that means a lot to these people that you're praying for. Notice the announcement about Brother Doyle Steele. Doyle has taken a really bad turn, and he's not doing well at all. And he is not conscious anymore. He's on pretty high doses of pain medicine. They're keeping him comfortable. And so they anticipate in the next few days his life will end. And it's sad, but at the same time, if you've been around Brother Doyle in the last, since you've known him, he's been here since, he was baptized here November 30th, 2005. And so it's been almost 12 years ago since he became a Christian, and I can't think of anybody who's been more of an encourager and just a sweethearted. His disposition has been remarkable, and but he loves the Lord, and most importantly, his salvation is because of what God has done for him, and so he's been ready for that. He said this several times over the past few months. He just wishes this would go ahead and happen, which is remarkable spirit. So pray for him during this transition, and pray for Wanda, that God will give her strength and that all would go well over the next few days. Kim Harmon is going to be going back to the CTCA tomorrow to meet with her doctors. We certainly want to keep Kim in our prayers, and Randy and Caitlin, that all would go well with those appointments. Joy mentioned Joy Brooks' surgery next Tuesday at St. Vincent. Continue to pray for Glenn Wilcoxon and Paula and Jim Banks and Virgie. And then we have others here, relatives of people in our congregation we need to be praying for. Have one addition, that is that Michael Jenkins, if you've been around Hoover for a bit, you know Michael is a former member here. They live in Texas now, right? Houston. His mom, Lucinda Jenkins, has been taken to the ICU. She's been put in the ICU, and they requested prayers for her. Her name is Lucinda Jenkins, so we want to add her name to our prayer list. A couple of things coming up as far as classes tonight. I'll be teaching here in the auditorium. We've also got a great ladies class that is in the library down that hall to my left, straight back. Shauna Brown, Donna Hanley teaching that class. We invite our ladies to attend that class after this break in just a minute. As far as things that are coming up, we do congratulate the Williams family, Nolan, Ashley, Jake, and Aubrey. They welcomed into their family Ruby Kenna Williams. Ruby was born yesterday. She weighed 7 pounds. She was 20 3/4 inches long. Everybody's doing great, and we're excited for the Williams family. They're at St. Vincent Hospital. I know you'll be excited to congratulate them. Several meetings coming up. The Young at Heart, we're going to meet this Friday. There's a family and friends fellowship meal this Sunday, so please plan to stay around after the morning worship service, and let's fellowship together and have a good meal together. And also new members. We've had a lot of folks place membership with us lately, and that's an exciting thing. We want to get your picture taken, so if you would plan to have your picture taken for the pictorial director this Sunday, October 22nd, you can do it either before or after the morning service in the front lobby back here. That helps us a lot. It's a church of this size, it's easy for us not to get to know everybody, and that really helps us a lot. So if you'd take time to do that, we would be grateful. That would help us. We appreciate you doing that for us. Okay, I was asked to highlight this announcement. The Fall Festival is coming up on the 27th, so what's that, a week from Friday? And that's always a lot of fun. And we need a couple things. We need you to respond in a couple of ways. If you would, there's a link on here. It's also, you can access this through our website. But go to this link, and we need you to sign up for like candy and games and some of the games that we have organized for the kids to play that night. If you can create a game, ring toss, various sorts of games that kids can play, then go and sign up for that. There's an area of need there. We also need more Little Debbie snack cakes brought here to the building. I promise we haven't been eating them, so please keep bringing them. We want to eat them, many of them. So keep bringing them. Bags of candy, we need those. So bring more and more and more. Please respond to that. Make yourself a note. Next time you go to the grocery store, just grab some if you would, and bring those so we're not short in that area. If you have any questions about that, where's Daniel? There's Daniel. See Daniel or Lauren with any questions. Anything else I need to say about that, Daniel? Good. Okay, so just respond to this. Let's see what we can do to make sure we don't have any needs that aren't met. Ladies' Day coming up Saturday, October 28th. Take a note of that. Agape Pecan Sale. It's a preaching opportunity down at Westover. Several of these. I'm not going to read all this to you, but make sure you are watching about this. Backwoods Final Fall Fling is this weekend, and then our Fall Festival on the 27th is going to have a chili cook-off, and that'll be fun. Food and games, wear favorite Halloween costume, non-scary. So we're looking forward to this. Anything else I need to mention that I've overlooked? Any prayer requests that I've forgotten about or don't know about? Okay. I'm glad you're here. We'll have a prayer, and then after the prayer, take a break. We'll go to our classes, and then my class will start up here in just a few minutes. Let's pray. Lord, you have been so good to us, and we thank you. You hear our prayer, and you answer our prayer according to what you know to be best, and we thank you for that. We come before you, Lord, as sinful people and broken in so many ways, and our priorities get out of whack too often. We confess to you, Lord, our deficiencies and our wickedness. But we're so thankful that you forgive and that you call us to holiness and that you give us the ability by your Spirit to live holy lives. Help us truly to be people who reflect your attributes to this world. We bring to you people who are struggling. We've got a lot of them in our church family. We pray for Dole Steele, who, from a medical perspective, seems to be entering his final hours or days. Please be with him and Wanda. We pray for Kim Harmon as she continues her fight against cancer and as she goes to CTCA this week, tomorrow, that those appointments would go well. For Joy Brooks and the surgery she has next Tuesday, that surgery would go well, and then that radiation that'll follow up after a few weeks. For Glenn Wilcoxon and Paula, and the difficulty of dementia, and for Jim Banks and Miss Virgie. We pray for Daisha Varner and Butch Haynes Connie Maynor, April Ehrlich, Lucinda Jenkins, others who are struggling. We got a lot of stuff coming up here in our church family, activities, devotionals, get-togethers, festivals. Let all those things be done in ways that honor you and draw us closer together as a church. We thank you, Lord, for hearing our prayer. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Good evening. How y'all? Good. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Aren't you proud of the Dodgers? See, I can't talk about Alabama-Auburn stuff. That's just too divisive and it's too emotional and too sensitive. I can talk about baseball in Alabama for the most part. I mean, the Cardinals didn't make the playoffs, and that hurt some people's feelings. I wouldn't miss any names, Court Covington, but the Dodgers, my favorite team, liked them since I was there's Mervin and I are only two Dodgers fans here, I think. So he actually is. Oh, you're okay. This Gene's a Dodgers fan too. Who's the other one? Oh, Macy? You're a Dodgers fan. All right. That's good. That's good. I know you guys actually have a reason to be because you used to live in L.A., right? I don't have that as good of a reason. I think that with me and the Dodgers fan, being a Dodgers fan, my parents didn't care anything about sports. People have asked me before, why I know you're a Dodgers fan, why are you a Cowboys fan? And I think it has to do with my parents not being a fan at all. My mom liked Alabama. She liked Alabama football, which is how I got that. My dad couldn't care less. Thought it was a waste of time, and if you could be outside working in the garden or watching football, then there was a no-brainer. Football is a waste of time in every respect. If you had anything productive to do other than watch sports. So, but I decided I was going to be a sports fan. And I grew up in the '70s, and I decided I wanted to. People at school, they liked the Braves, or they liked whoever, and they liked the Falcons, or they liked whoever in the NFL. And so I thought, I'm going to be a sports fan. And this is me kind of recreating things over as I look back on what must have happened. But back in the late 1970s and the early 80s, when I was at the age when I was kind of going to be picking my teams, that was when the Dodgers were good. They had, if you're a baseball fan, they had Fernando Valenzuela and Steve Sax, and Pedro Guerrero. Remember some of these guys? Yeah, and I started liking them. And the Cowboys had Roger Staubach and Tony Dorsett, Drew Pearson, some of these guys. So I think I picked those teams, and anyway, I've stuck with them over the years, good and bad. That didn't have anything to do with 1 Samuel. It's just kind of just an icebreaker. Just an icebreaker. If you're watching baseball, it's Dodgers haven't been anywhere close to the World, or haven't been in the World Series since 1988. So if they win tonight, they're going to play probably against the Yankees. It's looking like. You think the Astros are going to pull it out? Well, they're going to play the Astros or the Yankees, so I'm excited about it. Okay, but more importantly is the life of David, and we're in 1 Samuel 25, and we'll camp out there for the next little bit. This is a long chapter and a neat chapter, one that I preached on this chapter 2 or 3 years ago, so I was studying this and was having some deja vu. Some of this might be repetitive, but it's in the story of David, so we're going to go ahead and cover it, even if we did cover it a couple of years ago. Most of it will be new to us anyway. Setting the stage for you where we are. 1 Samuel is the story of the transition from the time of judges to the time of kings. You had this chaos, this anarchy, no ruler of any significance, and then the people cried out for a king, and so God said, I'm going to give you a king. And that king's going to be, we want a king like all the other nations. So God gave him a king like all the other nations. And that king was a king who didn't care much about God, but he was physically impressive, had some military ability, obstinate, wanted to do things his own way, wanted to be the king of kings. He wanted to be respected and all that. And his name was Saul. And so Saul didn't do very well. And God said, I'm going to take the kingdom away from Saul, and I'm going to give it to someone who's better than Saul. And that was a young man of a different family, not in Saul's lineage, a different family, son of Jesse. His name was David. And so David was young when God chose him to be the next king. And we're in that time period from the time that David was young until the time that he's a grown man and ready to take over as king, which happens at the end of 1 Samuel. But we're in that transitional period. We're in the time where Saul knows his kingdom has been taken away. He's been told this twice by Samuel. He knows. But he's fighting tooth and nail to hang on to this. He doesn't want to give up the kingdom, and he doesn't want it to be taken away from his family. He wants his son Jonathan to be the next king, even though he knows that's not what God has planned. So what we've studied the last couple of weeks are occasions where Saul is hunting David down. We don't have it in this chapter. Get a bit of a break. But he's been hunting David down, and through providential situations, God has rescued David. 2 chapters ago, they were going around a mountain. Saul was catching him. They're on opposite sides of the mountain, just, cat and mouse. And Saul is marching his people, and they're about to catch up, and a courier comes up and says, "Wait, king, the Philistines are attacking back home." And he has to break off that pursuit of David and go back home and take care of the Philistine threat, right? He dealt with that. And he brings 3,000 of his best soldiers back. He's going to get him this time. Finds out where he is. And David is just doing his best to stay alive. He's hiding in every nook and cranny that he can find. As the story goes, Saul was chasing him. Call of nature came upon him, and he went inside a cave. And it's going to, the ESV says relieve himself. Went back to the back part of the cave, Little did he know that in the back part of that cave, David and his 600 men had taken refuge there. And David's men were telling him, "David, this is the day that the Lord has made. Look what he's done. He brought him right here in front of you, vulnerable. You can take care of things right now." And David said, "I'm not going to draw my hand against God's anointed." So he cuts off a little corner of the cloak, and Saul finishes up and goes on out, and David lets him get a certain distance away, and he comes out and he says, "Look, this is what happened. I had the opportunity to kill you, King Saul, but I didn't do that because I'm not that kind of man. I'm not going to draw my hand against the king's anointed. But here's the cloak. Here's the corner of the cloak that I cut off." And Saul says, "You're a better man than I am. I don't deserve it." And so he leaves, at least temporarily, he leaves pursuit of David. And he goes back. So we've got a bit of an interlude now. And that brings us to our chapter 25, when David is now dealing with just trying to survive. He's trying to have enough food and provision to keep himself and his men alive. So we have this interesting story about David and this couple whose names were Nabal and Abigail. Sound familiar? An odd couple in so many respects. Let's look at this. We'll do it like we've done it in the past. Break this down a bit. Instead of reading the whole chapter, all of it, we'll do it paragraph by paragraph and think about what it means and what it has to say to us. Okay? 1 Samuel 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. I'm not going to say a lot about this, but one preacher I was actually listening to on this text, kind of made a pretty big deal out of this. And maybe he's got a point here. In history, we know this. When a great leader dies, it's a big deal. It's a lot of fanfare. You hear for days about this is what he did. These are his accomplishments, and just a lot of praise. Excuse me. A lot of praise of what kind of man he was, what kind of woman she was, all this sort of thing. And Winston, examples the preacher I was listening to used were when Winston Churchill died, whenever that was that the 60s, 50s, 60s? And then when President Kennedy died in 1963, that it's a big deal when somebody like that dies. I mean, everything stops and people just focus on that, and there are all these eulogies and all this stuff going on. But the preacher I was listening to on this text, he made this point that, why don't you have that here? Samuel has been the most important leader in Israel for decades. Since he was a little boy, he's been God's man. How much attention does he get in his death? A verse. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Okay, well, there you go. Preacher I'm talking to you about, when I was listening to on this, says, and I tend to agree with him, when the Bible does something like that, when it deviates from what we would expect in our own readings of things and the way things would normally be done, there's some sort of a theological point or some sort of subtle implication that we ought to pick up on. And that is consistent with the way that we're trying to read the Old Testament in a better kind of way, not reading it as a record of people and their accomplishments so much as we read the Old Testament about as a record of what God is doing and not what people are doing. The emphasis on the people is there to the extent that God is working through these people. So his point being that, yes, Samuel died, but what does that mean for the work of God? God's work is going to continue on because God is not limited by somebody like Samuel. Yeah, God used Samuel for a number of decades. He did a lot of good things through him. He judged people. He appointed Saul. He appointed David. He was Saul's counselor. He's David's counselor. He's been a stalwart for years and years and years. Now he's dead. So what? God continues his work. And that is a way of reading the Old Testament that'll change it a little bit for you when you recognize. Maybe a good example of this would be Isaiah 6. Uzziah had been king for 50-something years, 55 years, something, long time. Uzziah. In the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah 6, Isaiah has this moment. One of the greatest theophanies in all of Scripture. We saw the Lord high and lifted up. His cherubim, the smoke. Holy, holy, holy. This overwhelming scene where he fell down flat on his face and said, "Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips." That theophany of Isaiah 6. Here am I, send me. That's that chapter in Isaiah 6. And I think in that chapter what you've got is you've got Isaiah. What in the world are we going to do? Our king, who's been our king for 5.5 decades, is dead. What in the world are we going to do? God says, Isaiah, fall down on your knees and worship because the king hasn't died. I'm still here. I'm still reigning. And that image that he gets, high and lifted up, it's this kingdom kind of scene. God is on the throne. That was the impression that Isaiah got, and he walked away from that thinking, "Oh, I don't even deserve to be there." So see, that's kind of the way that the story of the Bible is told. Samuel dies, what's going to happen? Well, David gets up and goes to Ramah. Does it mean God didn't care about the death of his people? No, it doesn't mean that. It just doesn't mean God's work is not contingent on certain people. So that ought to be a comforting thing for us. When somebody great dies, somebody who's done a lot of good, God's work isn't going to stop. He's going to keep working. So maybe that's reading a little bit too much into verse 1 of chapter 25, but it's something to ponder at least when you do so within the context of how you read Old Testament stories. Let's go on and see what happens next. In latter part of verse 1, and we'll read down through verse 8. Interesting story. David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." All right, stop there. We'll read on here in a minute, but just stop there for a second. This is just a neat little story. David, in this world, David and his men basically had been protected. It was a dangerous place. You're raising sheep, and you had these marauding bands of people who would rob, who would take sheep. and robbed the sheep herders and so on. And so David and his men had basically been, in an unofficial capacity apparently, been protecting these flocks and making sure that none got stolen and none of the men were hurt and none of the goods of Nabal were taken. There's a kinsman relationship here. These are of the same general tribe, same distant family. So there's this, they're not just Jews, they're related more closely than that. They're within the same kinsman. And so an odd couple. Abigail is beautiful and shrewd and kind and wise. She's in tune with what's going on. And Nabal is a fool. He's a fool. Can't talk to him. Probably we could use stronger language than that to describe him. He is a worthless man. So, but they're married, and I love how the story plays out. Well, it's sad in some ways, but Abigail is such a beautiful woman and such a capable woman. It's really neat to read. So it gives us a lot of the details. 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. He's a rich man. It's time for the sheep shearing, and David basically sends 10 young men. And though this arrangement, there had been no contract signed that was customary for you provide protection over a period of time for sheep, flocks like this, that you would be compensated in some way, at least in providing some provisions for your people. And that's what he's asking for. It would be expected for Nabal to respond in kind here, since his sheep had been protected by David. So verse 9. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" That's a pejorative way of calling David the son of Jesse. "There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" What do you pick up on with that kind of statement? What kind of man was Nabal? Me, my stuff. Ain't getting nothing I got. David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. David's response is not good. It's not good at all. In contrast to how he had acted in the previous chapter, David loses it. I mean, it's almost like David his rage absolutely gets the best of him here. And notice the language, how many times he repeats these phrases. David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword," and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. What did they do with their swords? Strapped them on, right? In case you missed that. That's repeated down below, I think. The language, David, every man strap on his sword. David strapped on his sword. And every one of them strapped on his sword. I mean, just the repetition of that is violent language. David is furious. And he is about to do something he would regret. Because this is not how a king acts. This is not how a man of God acts. So you see this with David, don't you? Have you noticed this? I mean, he goes to the house of the priest, and he goes to the Philistines. Remember, and he acts like he's insane, and lets his spit drop down on his beard, acts like he's crazy. He does things like that. And then he has these great moments where he has an opportunity to kill Saul, and you can make the argument that he could have and should have done it, but he didn't. out of respect for the law of God and out of respect for the anointed one of God. He doesn't do it. And then you have this. He's been slighted. He's been insulted. I mean, this was an insult, and it was a strong insult. But this is not. The punishment he was about to mete out on Nabal and his family was way out of proportion to the level of insult that he had received. There are many other ways to handle something like this than to do what he was about to do. He apparently, he's got 400 men, leaves 200 back with the stuff. He's got 400 men, they've all strapped on their soldiers, and they're going to go down there and kill a bunch of farmers. Shepherds. That's what they're going to do. How's he going to feel about that? How's that going to make him look? How's it going to make him look in the eyes of the people? Is that what kings do? Is that what a man of God does? So you see this violent tendency that just kind of erupts all of a sudden here, and it's remarkable how violent the language is. But one of the young men, verse 14, one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this, and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." So the servant knows, you don't go to Nabal with this. That wouldn't have done any good at all. Don't tell Nabal, hey, look, he's coming. Nabal wouldn't have responded well. But he knows how to handle this. He goes to Abigail. So verse 18, she made haste and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already prepared, 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me. Behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." He's going to kill every last one of them. It's crazy, isn't it? What in the world is he thinking? Kill them all. Surely there's some sort of halfway. Surely there's some sort of, you ride down there and you say, "Look, Nabal, look, here's what we've done, and here's what we would like. We don't want to take everything. We just want you to pay a fair price for the services we provided." David's rage has overcome him. He just wants revenge. Maybe that's a product of all the stress that he's been under, running from Saul, had the opportunity to kill Saul and didn't, and now I don't know. I don't know what's going on with him, but he is acting in a way that's inappropriate and is inconsistent with a man of God. So verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from I love the way she responds. Look, she's an incredibly wise woman. She hurried and got down from the donkey and fell down before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Oh, me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is his name. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live." Now listen to this, verse 29. "If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God, and the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord taking vengeance himself? And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. Now that is an incredibly tactful speech. Notice the attributes of that speech. Number one, it's very respectful. She knows she's going up against a man who is infuriated. He's dead set on murder. He's been insulted. She can't defend her husband. Her husband's an idiot. So what does she do? She approaches him respectfully. But also, she says a couple of pointed things, doesn't she? And one of those pointed things is, and you got to be careful when you're talking to somebody like this, right? She knows how to play the game. You're going to be king. God's going to make you king. You're going to be king over Israel. And when you get to that point, you do not want this on your record. You don't want this. It would have hurt him politically. It would have, he's going to, part of being king, I mean, God makes him a king, but the people have to follow the king. And it's not like they just choose to follow whatever king happens to be there. There's all this political stuff, and people decide whether or not they're going to follow. In fact, David, for the first part of his reign, he doesn't have all the nation. Not all the nation follows David. And so I think she's looking ahead, and she's saying, look, if you do what you're about to do, it's going to hurt you. You may be made king anyway, but politically speaking, this is going to be bad. It's going to hurt you among this region of the land, the Calebites. These are pretty powerful people. These people have a lot of political clout. And you do what you're about to do, and people aren't going to respect that. And don't need to do it. So her response here is very wise. Tactful, and yet forceful, but forceful in a respectful way. And as you know from ancient Jewish culture, women, often their voices were marginalized. And for a woman to approach David like this, in this kind of way, she does so humbly, but also confidently talk to him like that, and for him to listen, it's pretty remarkable the way she did this. So it's a pretty cool story, you know. David responds well. He responds well. We're almost out of time, but verse 32. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from avenging myself with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left in Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." And Abigail said to Nabal, and behold, Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. You know, so presumably, stroke, some sort of aneurysm, heart attack, something. But it took him 10 days to die. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti the son of Laish, who was of Gallim. And so ends the story of Nabal and Abigail. Interesting, yes? I mean, it's a neat story. It gives you a glimpse into the passion of David. David was, he could be so reasonable and so kind and so concerned about not doing things rash. I mean, it's just interesting. The same man who had Saul there using the bathroom in front of him in the back of a cave, the man who had caused him all this misery, and David is all philosophical about that. I'm not going to lay my hand against God's anointed. The very next chapter, he gets insulted by some shepherds, and he's planning on going down there and slaughtering a bunch of farmers. And thankfully, Abigail intervenes and stops it. So, gives you just an idea what David was like and these kinds of personality traits that are going to come out again and again in his reigning as king. He will be the king like he was in the last chapter at times, kind, compassionate, considerate, and then sometimes he's going to be impulsive and rash, brash, and he's going to do things that he regrets. So, you got some of both with David. You're going to see those come out again and again. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope everybody has a good night. I'll see you all on Sunday.